What would you do if a 9-year-old boy wearing torn sneakers, patched with strips of silver duct tape, claimed he could heal your child? And the miracle was, he was right. It was a cold morning in Chicago, Illinois. Not cold enough for snow, but just enough for your breath to turn to mist rising like small clouds in the air. Your fingertips tingled with numbness, even inside woolen gloves. At the Lurie Children's Medical Center, located along the bustling Michigan Avenue, a constant flow of people rushed in and out like a never-ending river. Scarves tightened around necks, hands clutched steaming cups of coffee from nearby Starbucks or Dunkin'. They moved quickly, as if trying to outrun the pain, the harsh diagnoses, and the sleepless nights that had brought them here. Somewhere in the distance, the wail of an ambulance siren cut through the noise, blending into the relentless rhythm of life in Chicago, the city of skyscrapers, where the lights from high-rise windows flickered like stars on the ground. The wind from Lake Michigan blew in, slicing through clothing, stinging the skin, causing people to lower their heads and walk faster. Yet, amid this hurried current, amid the chaos of a winter day at the hospital, a small figure stood still, like a moment of silence in a storm, drawing the gaze of anyone who happened to stop long enough to notice. The boy sat on a crumpled piece of cardboard, carefully placed right next to the hospital's main revolving door, where people streamed in and out nonstop. That piece of cardboard, perhaps picked up from a street corner somewhere, was his chosen seat, a makeshift chair in the city's heart. He was quietly drawing in an old notebook, its pages worn and frayed, the cover faded to a yellow-brown hue from sun and rain. The pages inside were filled with scribbles, human figures, hands massaging legs, strange symbols that only he understood. Kevil Jones was a 9-year-old black boy with sharp glinting eyes, as if they held an untold story. Though still childish, his face carried a strange calm, as if he had witnessed more than any child ever should. Kevil wore an oversized, worn-out coat, sleeves rolled high to reveal thin arms, the skin cracked from the cold. His sneakers were falling apart, one patched with erratic strips of duct tape, a work of perseverance. A gray knit beanie fraying at the edges covered his ears and messy short curls. Beside him was an old fabric backpack zipper, broken slightly open, to reveal a few simple belongings: a reused plastic water bottle, a half-eaten energy bar wrapped in foil, and a stubby pencil, the one he held now. He drew slowly, each stroke careful, as if he were recording something important, a memory or a promise. Now and then he'd lift his head and let his gaze drift over the crowd. Anxious-faced mothers, heavy-stepping fathers, children clutching adult hands with blank stares, as if they'd grown accustomed to the smell of antiseptic and the cold white light of the hospital. Kevil didn't beg for money, seek attention, or make a fuss. He just sat there, eyes sharply observing the passing crowd, like an explorer hunting treasure among the faces of pain. He showed up most Saturdays, a fixture of the hospital scene. At first, the Lurie Medical Center's security team had tried to shoo him away, assuming he was just a homeless kid exploiting pity. "Hey, kid, you can't sit here," one guard had barked, pointing toward the street. But Kevil only smiled a soft, yet determined smile, packed up his things, hugged his notebook to his chest, and left. The following week he returned. Same cardboard, same notebook, same pencil stub. Eventually the guards gave up. They realized Kevil wasn't bothering anyone. He answered politely, his voice soft but clear, strangely confident for a child of only 9. A nurse named Sarah once paused to ask, "Who are you waiting for, Kevil?" He shook his head and smiled. "I'm just sitting here." She nodded and didn't press further, though her gaze lingered on him, filled with curiosity and a touch of tenderness. Passers-by usually paid Kevil no mind. They were preoccupied: a doctor's appointment, a test result, another night on a hospital bench. They assumed he had family inside, maybe a sibling in treatment, or he was waiting for someone to pick him up. No one asked too many questions. At a place like Lurie, where pain and hope interwove in every eye, people often avoided digging into others' stories. But Keval wasn't just a random child who happened to be there. He came with a purpose, though no one had realized it yet. Every line he drew in his notebook wasn't random. They were memories of his mother, Marla Jones, a physical therapist who once worked at free clinics in the Englewood projects. She taught him how to use his hands to soothe muscles, listen patiently to the body, and believe that even those who had lost everything could reclaim a part of themselves. Those drawings, the hands, the legs, the scrawled symbols, were Keval's way of keeping his mother close, even though she had passed away 2 years ago, leaving him alone in the harsh world of Chicago. As Keval sat there, eyes scanning the crowd, a silver Tesla silently pulled up near the fire hydrant across from the hospital. The engine stayed on, but the driver sat motionless as if trapped in his thoughts. It was Jackson Reed, a 42-year-old white billionaire CEO of Windermere Capital, one of Chicago's most significant investment funds. He had graced the covers of Forbes and the Wall Street Journal, hailed as the man who could turn anything into gold. But now his sharp features looked weary. His salt and pepper hair was tousled, and his tie hung loose around a wrinkled collar. A Patek Philippe glinted on his wrist, but his eyes were hollow. The gaze of a man used to commanding hundreds of employees and billions of dollars, now powerless before a challenge greater than any business deal he'd ever faced. He stared through the windshield, eyes resting on the stream of people entering the hospital. However, his mind was elsewhere with his 6-year-old daughter Emily, who once ran joyfully through the garden of their Lakeview mansion and was now just a quiet figure in a wheelchair. Jackson opened the rear door of the Tesla and lifted Emily into his arms, holding her so tightly it was as if he feared she might vanish. With golden hair tied in braids and small legs hidden beneath a soft pink blanket, Emily said nothing. Her wide blue eyes gazed upward, not at the hospital building before her, but at the gray sky overhead. A car accident 6 months ago had taken away her ability to walk, turning her from a lively child into a fragile shadow. Jackson walked toward the revolving doors, heavy-footed, unaware of Keval sitting on the cardboard. But Keval saw him. He saw how Jackson held Emily as if she were his entire world. He saw Emily's eyes hollow, yet full of yearning, searching for something beyond the hospital walls. Keval watched longer than usual, his hands pausing mid-sketch notebook resting on his lap. Then, just as they were about to pass, he stood up. His voice, small yet clear, pierced the cold air. "Sir, I can help your daughter walk again." The stream of people entering and leaving the Lurie Children's Medical Center on Michigan Avenue never stopped, like the heartbeat of Chicago, hurried unrelenting. The neon lights from the hospital sign lit up the street, reflecting in the puddles left behind by the rain the night before. The wail of ambulance sirens blended with the rumble of buses and the chatter of passers-by, creating a chaotic urban symphony. Wind from Lake Michigan swept through, carrying a biting chill that made everyone bow their heads and walk faster. But across from the hospital, near an old fire hydrant, a silver Tesla stood silently, parked, the engine still running, as if the driver was hesitating before making a decision he couldn't bring himself to make. Inside the car, Jackson Reed, a 42-year-old white billionaire and CEO of Windermere Capital, sat motionless, his empty gaze fixed straight ahead. He was once the man gracing the pages of Forbes, hailed as Chicago's Midas, the man who could turn any deal into gold. But now his sharply defined face showed fatigue. His salt and pepper hair was disheveled, and a loose tie hung from the collar of a wrinkled shirt. The Patek Philippe on his wrist still sparkled. Still, his eyes were vacant, those of someone used to commanding hundreds of employees and managing billions of dollars, now powerless before a challenge far greater than any business deal he had ever faced. In the back seat, Emily Jackson's 6-year-old daughter sat in a booster seat. Her golden hair was neatly braided, and her tiny legs were tucked under a pale pink blanket. Her blue eyes were wide open, yet no words escaped her lips. A car accident 6 months earlier had taken away Emily's ability to walk, transforming her from a little whirlwind who once ran and laughed through the garden of their Lakeview mansion, chasing after their golden retriever Max, and giggling at butterflies into a quiet shadow of herself. Her gaze often drifted toward the sky, as if trying to escape the reality of hospital walls, the smell of antiseptic, and the sterile white light. Jackson opened the back door and lifted Emily in his arms, hugging her so tightly. It was as if he feared she might disappear. He walked toward the revolving door, his steps heavy shoulders burdened by an invisible weight. He overlooked Keeval Jones, the 9-year-old black boy, sitting on the nearby cardboard old notebook on his lap, sharp eyes tracking his every move. But Keeval saw him. He saw how Jackson held Emily as if she was his entire world, the only reason he breathed. He saw Emily's eyes avoiding the sight of the hospital, focused instead on the gray sky above, where the skyscrapers blocked out the sunlight. Keeval watched longer than usual. His hands stopped moving, the notebook resting still on his lap. He felt the invisible pain between father and daughter, a pain he understood well, because he too had lost the most important person in his life. Then, just as they were about to pass through the revolving door, Keeval stood up, his torn shoes squeaking against the concrete. His voice, small but clear, rang out in the cold air, cutting through the noise of the city. "Sir, I can help your daughter walk again." Jackson stopped, not out of anger, but because of the voice. It was gentle, confident, and full of conviction, as if the boy believed every word he said. Jackson turned around, his eyes narrowing, face tense. "What did you just say?" Keeval stepped forward, his old notebook tucked under his arm, and his eyes locked on Jackson. "I said I can help your daughter walk again." Jackson clutched Emily tighter, his voice cold. "That's not a funny joke, kid." Keeval didn't flinch. "I'm not joking." His eyes didn't waver. They held a strange maturity within the thin frame of a 9-year-old boy. Jackson looked down at the duct-taped sneakers, the cracked glasses dangling from Keeval's collar, and the worn-out backpack beside him. He was certain this was a scam, a street kid trying to make money off someone else's pain. "You have any idea what she's been through?" Jackson asked, his voice sharp. Keeval shook his head, but his tone remained calm. "I don't need to know. I know I can help." Jackson turned away and walked into the hospital without another word. But Keeval's voice lingered inside his head like a tune that refused to fade. Jackson walked into Lurie Children's Medical Center, holding Emily tighter, trying to push Keeval's voice out of his mind. But the boy's words clung to him like a high-risk investment he couldn't ignore. During doctor appointments, when he heard the familiar phrases, "a long journey ahead," "manage expectations," and "miracles take time," Keeval's voice echoed in his head. "I can help your daughter walk again." It wasn't the hollow promise of a scam artist, but a truth spoken with quiet confidence, the kind that made Jackson, a man who lived by data and logic, feel unsettled. He looked at Emily, sitting silently in her wheelchair, eyes turned toward the clinic window, where Chicago's skyscrapers loomed blurred in the morning mist. She didn't speak, but her small hand gripped the edge of her pink blanket, as if trying to hold on to something she had lost. That afternoon, as Jackson carried Emily out of the hospital, the sunlight filtered through the tall buildings of Chicago, casting patches of light and shadow along Michigan Avenue. But the cold was still sharp as a blade, and the wind from Lake Michigan made him pull his collar up higher. Keeval was still there on his familiar piece of cardboard notebook resting on his lap, eyes shining intensely as if he'd known Jackson would return. Jackson paused, looking at Emily, resting her head against his shoulder, eyes closed and face pale. He stepped toward Keeval, his voice tense. "Why would you say something like that? Do you think this is a joke? She's been through enough." Keeval slowly shook his head. eyes fixed on Jackson. "I'm not joking, sir. I don't need to know who she is to help her." Jackson snapped, voice sharp. "You're 9 years old. A kid with torn shoes and a busted backpack. What could you possibly know about any of this?" Keval looked down at his notebook, fingers gently brushing the frayed edge of a page as if drawing comfort from the lines inside. "My mom used to help people walk again," he said, voice soft but steady. "She was a physical therapist in Englewood. She worked at free clinics for people who couldn't afford treatment. She taught me how to use my hands, be patient, and believe that the body remembers even when it forgets for a while." Jackson stood stunned, but doubt still rooted deep inside him. "So, you think you're a doctor now?" he asked, voice laced with sarcasm. Keval shook his head. "I don't need to be a doctor. I need to do what my mom did. Listen to the body, help it remember what it used to know." A nurse, Sarah, passed by and waved at Keval with a warm, familiar smile. A janitor pushing a trash cart nodded to him like an old friend. They all knew Keval as if he were an irreplaceable part of the hospital. Jackson hesitated, his gaze shifting between Keval and Emily. He rubbed his temples, trying to understand why he was even talking to a homeless kid. "What do you want?" "Money," he asked coldly. Keval shook his head. "I don't want money. I want 1 hour. Let me try." Jackson looked at Emily. Her eyes were open now, curiously watching Keval. He sighed. "Fine. If you want to waste our time, meet us at Grant Park. Noon. Tomorrow. Don't be late." Keval nodded, a flicker of light in his eyes. "I'll be there." Jackson turned away, carrying Emily back to the Tesla. But in the rear-view mirror, he saw Keval still standing there, notebook clutched tightly to his chest, like he was holding on to a promise that couldn't be broken. That night, in the luxurious penthouse in downtown Chicago, Jackson sat in his office surrounded by papers and glowing computer screens. But he couldn't focus on any of it. Keval's words kept replaying like a haunting song. He opened his laptop and typed, "Keval Jones, Chicago," into Google, only to find a few old articles about a community clinic in Englewood where Keval's mother, Marla Jones, had worked. One article mentioned how she had helped a veteran walk again after years in a wheelchair, but there was no information about Keval. He closed the laptop and looked out the window where the city lights twinkled like stars. Part of him wanted to call hospital security and have them check on the boy, but another part, smaller, quieter, felt a flicker of hope he didn't dare admit. He looked toward Emily's room, where she was sleeping, the pink blanket pulled up to her chin. And for the first time in many months, he felt something unfamiliar. Not despair, but something almost resembling belief. The following Sunday, Grant Park, a green oasis in the heart of Chicago, where tree-lined paths shimmered under fiery red maple leaves, and birdsong blended with the laughter of playing children, became the stage for a fateful meeting. Keval had arrived early, waiting on a bench beneath an old maple tree. His worn backpack sat at his feet, containing a few simple items: a clean towel, a warm bag of rice, a tennis ball, and a jar of coconut oil. His tattered shoes were still patched with duct tape, the gray knit beanie covering his ears, but his eyes shone with an unshakable determination. Jackson arrived a few minutes late, pushing Emily in her wheelchair, his eyes still full of doubt, like an investor assessing a high-risk deal. Emily sat quietly, her pink blanket draped over her lap, her gaze drifting toward the children running nearby, as if she remembered the days when she too had been that free. Keval began with simple movements, placing the warm rice bag on Emily's thighs to relax the muscles and gently rotating her legs, each motion slow and deliberate. Jackson stood nearby, arms crossed, ready to intervene at the slightest mistake, but there was none. Keval spoke softly to Emily. "What's your favorite color?" "Blue," Emily replied in a tiny voice, barely a whisper. Like the sky today, Keval asked, pointing upward where a few rays of sunlight pierced the clouds. Emily nodded, a faint smile flickering across her pale face. He asked about her favorite Disney movie about Max the dog back home. Max loves to run, Emily said sadly. I used to run with him too. Keval smiled. You'll run with Max again, Emily. You have to give your body time. Gradually, Emily began to open up, even asking questions herself. Where do you live? Somewhere around here, Keval replied with a subtle smile. You don't go to school anymore. Keval hesitated, then answered. My mom passed away. I'm taking care of myself now. Standing a few steps away, Jackson felt a sharp pang as he heard Keval mention his mother. He looked at Emily and saw her smiling for the first time since the accident. After 30 minutes, Keval gently tapped Emily's ankle. Do you feel anything? Emily whispered, like pressure. Jackson was stunned. He stepped closer, his voice trembling. What did you say? Emily repeated. Like pressure. Daddy. It was the first time she had felt anything in her legs. Keval nodded. Good. Your muscles are starting to remember. Jackson looked at the boy, his doubt beginning to crack, but he kept his expression stern, unwilling to let hope in too quickly. In the following weeks, they continued meeting at Grant Park, undeterred by the cold winds blowing off Lake Michigan. Keval taught Emily exercises with resistance bands to strengthen her ankles and rolled a tennis ball under her feet to stimulate nerve endings. Jackson began participating, learning to massage pressure points behind her knees, though he was clumsy and often got it wrong. Not like that, Mr. Keval laughed, correcting Jackson's hands. One day, Emily broke down. Her voice trembled. I'm tired. Nothing's changing. I'll never walk again. Tears streamed down her cheeks as her small fists struck the blanket. Keval knelt beside her eyes, steady and calm. I used to sit in a shelter in Englewood, watching my mom get weaker from illness and being unable to do anything. I wanted to give up too, Emily. I cried every night thinking I'd never be able to do anything. But if you give up, the part of you that wants to walk will give up too. Emily looked down, tears falling freely. I'm scared, Keval. I'm scared I'll never run again. Keval took her hand, his voice soft but firm. I'm scared too, but being scared means you're close to something big. Don't give up. Okay. Standing behind them. Jackson heard Emily admit her fear for the first time. He felt his heart break, but also catch a flicker of hope. He began to look at Keval as a child and as someone who might bring them a miracle. One day after a session, he turned to Keval. You can't keep wandering around like this. Come stay with us just for a while. Keval hesitated, glancing down at his tattered shoes. Are you sure people in your neighborhood? They're not used to someone like me. Jackson let out a chuckle. After what you've done for Emily, if they say anything, they'll have to deal with me. Keval nodded, a hint of surprise and deep gratitude in his eyes. News about Keval spread like wildfire through a dry forest, from the hallways of Lurie Children's Hospital to the busy streets of Chicago. Nurse Sarah saw Emily move her legs at Grant Park during her lunch break. She recounted the moment to her colleagues in the physical therapy department, her voice full of amazement. The Reed girl felt her legs. A 9-year-old boy did that. The story reached Dr. Patel, a neurologist at Lurie. Curious, he emailed Jackson asking, "Is it true that a child is doing this?" Jackson responded briefly, "He's unlike anyone I've ever met." Before long, other families began arriving at Grant Park, carrying fragile hope. An 8-year-old boy with a walker, a 10-year-old girl recovering from a traumatic brain injury. Their parents had all heard about the black boy who helped the Reed girl move her legs. Keval turned no one away. He spent hours guiding each person, teaching parents how to use warm towels and rice bags, and encouraging them without pressure. "Go slow," he told a worried mother. "The body needs time to talk to itself." He knelt beside children, gently rotating their legs, chatting about simple things like basketball or cartoons, helping them forget their fear. Once a quiet place with a few joggers, Grant Park became a center of hope. Father Michael, a local priest, brought folding chairs and set them under the old maple tree. A bagel shop in the Loop sent coffee and bread every Sunday. A Chicago Tribune reporter, Lena, showed up with a camera capturing Keval, kneeling beside a child, patiently guiding each movement, his duct-taped shoes and gray knit cap standing out among the crowd. Lena's article ran on page 2 with the headline, "9-year-old boy brings miracles to a Chicago park." Keval asked not to have his full name published, but people found out anyway through stories passed from one mouth to another. Dr. Patel offered to become a mentor and proposed bringing Keval into a youth physical therapy program at Lurie. Urban Hope, a Chicago-based nonprofit, offered to sponsor equipment for Keval's outdoor classroom. A teacher in the Loop, Ms. Maya, volunteered to tutor him so he could return to school. But not everyone welcomed Keval. Dr. Harper, an orthopedic specialist at Lurie, voiced his skepticism at a departmental meeting. "A child can't do the work of professionals," he said sharply. "We need to verify he's not causing harm." Dr. Patel countered. "This boy is doing what many of us have forgotten how to do: bring hope." The debate only fueled the story's momentum, attracting families from suburbs like Evanston and Oak Park. Jackson looked at Keval now, living in the guest room of his penthouse, with a clean bed, a small desk, and a new pair of shoes that Keval still refused to wear. He saw that the boy wasn't just changing Emily, he was changing a community. One day Jackson quietly placed a sandwich next to Keval's bag without saying a word. Keval smiled. "Thanks, sir." Emily, sitting nearby in her wheelchair, turned to Jackson and said, "I like seeing Keval help people. It makes me feel like I'm part of something bigger." Jackson looked at his daughter, and his heart warmed. He realized that Keval wasn't just helping Emily heal, he was giving her something his wealth could never buy: meaning. On a warm Sunday, the air at Grant Park held a different energy, as if all of Chicago were holding its breath, waiting for a miracle. The red maples glowed under the rare winter sunlight, their leaves drifting gently onto the paths. Birds chirped in harmony with the laughter of children playing basketball nearby, painting a vivid scene in the city's heart. Emily sat in her wheelchair, silent, but with eyes full of determination, like a little warrior preparing for the biggest battle of her life. The pale pink blanket lay across her lap, but her small hands clutched the sides of her chair, as if channeling all her strength. Keval knelt before her, laying down the towel like he always did. The warm rice bag and tennis ball rested beside him. Just like before, he said calmly, his eyes lit with quiet conviction, "We help you stand. You do the rest." Jackson stood behind both hands under Emily's shoulders, his heart pounding like before a billion-dollar deal. Except this time, the stakes were his entire world. Keval carefully positioned Emily's feet, adjusting each detail with the precision of someone far older. "Count to 3. He whispered, his voice soft but steady. Emily closed her eyes and inhaled deeply, her hands trembling. 1, 2, 3. Jackson lifted her, and the lightness of Emily's body made his chest tighten with emotion. Keval steadied her knees, his gaze focused like an artist finishing a masterpiece. And then Emily stood. Her legs shook, but she held firm. The crowd now comprised of dozens of families. A few medical staff from Lurie and Father Michael fell silent. A child whispered, "She's standing." A mother covered her mouth, tears falling down her face. Emily opened her eyes, her face glowing. "I'm standing," she said, voice trembling. Jackson froze, unable to believe what he was seeing. He slowly let go, afraid that a single wrong move might shatter the moment. But Emily remained upright, her small legs unsteady, yet determined. Then she took a step, wobbly, then another, and a third, before falling into her father's arms. Jackson held her tightly, laughing and crying. At once his voice choked with emotion. "You did it, Emily. You did it." Emily turned to Keval, her eyes sparkling. "You said I could do it." Keval smiled, eyes glistening. "I said we'd try, Emily." The crowd erupted. Father Michael began clapping, and soon the whole park filled with applause and cheers like a victory anthem echoing through the city. Standing at the edge of the crowd, Dr. Patel shook his head in amazement, jotting something down in his notebook. Even Dr. Harper, though still skeptical, couldn't deny the miracle before him. Emily, now back in her wheelchair, kept smiling and held Keval's hand. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft but full of feeling. Keval only nodded, then returned to the bench to quietly pack his things, as if it had been another ordinary day. But to Jackson, this was no ordinary day. It was a miracle, a moment he would carry with him for the rest of his life. He looked at Keval, the boy with the duct-taped shoes and the old notebook, and realized that miracles don't come from wealth or power, but from a resilient heart and unshakable belief. That night, Jackson stood on the balcony of his luxurious penthouse in downtown Chicago, gazing at the city lights twinkling like stars scattered across the earth. The wind from Lake Michigan swept through, but the chill didn't make him shiver this time. His home no longer felt like a hospital, filled with long, anxious, silent nights. The sound of Emily's giggles came from the living room as she chatted with her grandmother over FaceTime, recounting the moment she had stood and taken steps in Grant Park. "Grandma, I took 3 steps," she said, her voice full of joy. Now a part of the family, Keval lived in the guest room, with a clean bed, a small desk, and a new pair of shoes Jackson had quietly bought for him. But Keval still refused to wear them, staying loyal to his duct-taped sneakers. Every morning he continued guiding Emily through her exercises, patiently teaching her how to move her toes and balance like a young teacher with a big heart. One evening, as Jackson washed dishes in the sleek kitchen, the chandelier casting light over expensive porcelain plates, he turned to Keval, who was drawing at the dining table, his old notebook never far from reach. "You know, Keval," Jackson said, his voice low but filled with emotion, "you've changed everything." Keval looked up, his fingers pausing on the page. "I'm just doing what my mom did," he replied, a flicker of sadness in his eyes as he mentioned her. Jackson placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, his voice softening. "Your mom must be so proud of you, Keval." The boy smiled, eyes glistening. "I think she sees it all." Jackson wiped his eyes, trying to hide the emotion. But he couldn't deny what this boy had accomplished, something dozens of doctors and millions of dollars had failed to do. "You're going to change a lot more lives," he said, "and I'm going to help you do it." Keval nodded, his eyes bright. "I've already started." News about Keval continued to spread, not just throughout Chicago, but beyond through social media posts and local news stories. Dr. Patel launched a training program for Keval, integrating him into hospital internships at Lurie, where he learned to combine his mother's folk knowledge with modern medical science. Urban Hope. The nonprofit organization funded equipment for Keval's outdoor classroom at Grant Park, which now drew dozens of families weekly from struggling neighborhoods like Englewood to affluent suburbs like Evanston. A school in the Loop accepted Keval as a student, offering him a full scholarship, secretly funded by Jackson, who never mentioned it. But Keval remained Keval, still wearing his worn shoes, checking on Emily before helping anyone else, still sketching in his notebook to keep his mother close. The drawings now weren't just memories, but plans and ideas to help even more people. Jackson, who once lived in a world of numbers and contracts, now found new meaning in Emily's smile and Keval's resilience. He started spending time at Grant Park to support Emily and help Keval run the sessions, carrying chairs and handing out water. He realized that money and power, though capable of buying the best doctors, could never buy hope. Some people don't need credentials or a perfect past. What they carry inside their heart, perseverance, and reason to keep going, is more than enough. Kevil, a black boy from the Englewood Projects, had turned Grant Park into a place of hope, where first steps were taken and smiles returned. If this story touched you, share it. And if you meet a child like Kevil or a girl like Emily, say to them, "You matter. You are needed."